The invitation to the governor's charity ball sat untouched on my kitchen counter for an entire week before my mother finally called. It was her annual event, co-chaired with my father, designed to raise money for children's education. Every year, it drew the most influential figures in the state, around 500 guests, each dressed in elegant black tie attire, sipping champagne while discussing policies, philanthropy, and prestige. "Lauren, we need to discuss Saturday's ball," she said, her tone already carrying that sharp, familiar edge that always preceded disappointment. "Your father and I have decided it's best if you don't attend this year." I was sitting in my home office when she called, surrounded by stacks of documents and open folders. My laptop screen displayed the final review of 20 grant proposals, each one a plea for hope, funding, and the chance to change children's lives. I paused, her words sinking in. "Why not?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even though I already sensed the answer. "The guest list is extremely sophisticated this year," she replied, as if she were describing a delicate piece of art that I might smudge with my presence. "The governor, several state senators, CEOs, and major philanthropists will be there. People who donate hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions, to causes. We just don't want you to feel uncomfortable around that level of society." Her words echoed through the quiet of my office. My gaze drifted to the foundation's checkbook resting on my desk, the same one I'd used just last month to sign a $1 million grant for the state's education initiative. The very program that had earned the governor's personal commendation and positioned me, ironically enough, as his largest individual donor. I let out a small laugh under my breath, though there was no humor in it. My parents had always been skilled at rewriting reality to fit their version of hierarchy and propriety. To them, appearances outweighed everything: kindness, integrity, even truth. I could almost picture them preparing for the event, my mother rehearsing her smile in the mirror while my father adjusted his cufflinks, both perfectly content in a world where image meant more than impact. They wanted a flawless evening, free of what they considered distractions. And apparently, that included me, the daughter who built a foundation from scratch, the one who funded programs they liked to take credit for at luncheons and press conferences. I glanced again at the untouched invitation, its embossed gold lettering glinting faintly under the afternoon light. My name looked so elegant printed there, as if I belonged among them. Maybe I did once. Or maybe I never did. As the silence stretched between us, I finally said, "Don't worry, Mom. I wouldn't want to make anyone uncomfortable." Then I hung up, took the invitation in my hands, and tore it cleanly in two. The sound of paper ripping was oddly satisfying, a quiet rebellion against years of subtle exclusions dressed up as concern. Outside, the sky was turning amber with sunset, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel left out. I felt free. "I see. You know how you are at these events," Mom continued, her tone slipping into that gentle condescension she'd perfected over the years. "You get quiet. You don't know what to say to successful people. Your sister Melissa will be there with her husband. They understand how to work a room, how to talk to donors. You just feel out of place." Her words pricked at something old and familiar inside me, a memory of every dinner, every fundraiser, every polished social affair where my silence was interpreted as inadequacy instead of choice. My foundation, built from the inheritance Grandma Ruth left me, held assets of over $50 million. 5 years of long nights, endless proposals, community meetings, and partnerships had turned it into one of the state's most impactful educational charities. But to my family, that meant little. They never asked about it, never read the reports, never even bothered to visit the schools we funded. To them, my work was just an idle pastime, a soft distraction for a woman who didn't quite fit into their gilded version of success. "I understand," I said quietly, forcing steadiness into my voice. "I knew you would," she replied without missing a beat, her satisfaction practically audible through the phone. "You've always been so reasonable about accepting your limitations. Not everyone can be sophisticated, and that's perfectly fine. You have your little non-profit volunteer work. That's more your speed." My little non-profit volunteer work. The words echoed bitterly in my mind. I looked around my office, at the rows of framed photographs lining the wall, children holding up new textbooks, smiling teachers in refurbished classrooms, ribbon cuttings at community learning centers my foundation had made possible. As founder and director of the Hartwell Foundation, I oversaw a staff of 12 and distributed $5 million annually in grants. Volunteer work, I whispered under my breath, almost amused by the absurdity. Thanks for letting me know, I said finally, because what else was there to say? You're welcome, sweetheart, she replied brightly, as if she had done me a kindness. Oh, and don't feel obligated to donate to the cause. I know money is tight for you. Just knowing you support us in spirit is enough. Money is tight for me. I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped, soft, sharp, and full of disbelief. Before I could think of a response, I heard the faint click of the call ending. She'd hung up before I could correct her, before I could tell her that her precious ball existed this year only because of my foundation's funding. But that was my mother. She lived in a version of reality that suited her pride, and nothing could touch it. A knock at the office door broke my thoughts. Lauren, came Jennifer's voice, steady, efficient, and always polite. She stepped inside, holding a clipboard and her ever-present notepad. The governor's office called, she said, her eyes flicking to my expression. They wanted to confirm that you'll be at Saturday's ball. Apparently, the governor wants to personally thank you for the education initiative funding. He said it's the largest single donation they've ever received. I sat back in my chair, the irony of it all settling over me like a slow, heavy tide. My own parents, so worried I might embarrass them, had no idea that the highlight of their evening would be the governor publicly acknowledging the daughter they'd deliberately excluded. Did they say what time he plans to speak? I asked, reaching for my planner. During the dinner portion, just before the live auction, Jennifer replied. They want to ensure you're seated near the front, at the head donor table. I smiled faintly, imagining the look on my mother's face when she realized who the guest of honor actually was. Thank you, Jennifer, I said. Go ahead and confirm my attendance. She nodded and left the room, her footsteps fading down the hall. I stared for a long moment at the invitation still sitting in the corner of my desk, white, elegant, heavy cardstock embossed with gold filigree. I had nearly thrown it away after that call. Now, it felt different. It wasn't an invitation anymore. It was an opportunity to show up, not for their approval, but for myself, for the years I'd spent being quietly dismissed. I picked up the invitation and slipped it into my planner. This time, I wasn't going to stand in the background, invisible and underestimated. This time, they would see me. Tell them I'll be there, I said finally, my voice calm but laced with something I couldn't quite name. Jennifer nodded, making a quick note. Your mother is co-chairing that event, right? She must be so proud, she added with a smile, unaware of the irony in her words. I didn't respond. Proud wasn't the word I'd use. My mother's pride was selective, reserved for the things that reflected well on her, not for the things I built quietly on my own. The next morning, as I was reviewing a proposal for a district-wide reading initiative, my phone rang again. The number flashed with a state office prefix. I answered, and a warm, confident voice came through the line. Ms. Hartwell, this is Michael Torres, the governor's chief of staff. How are you today? I'm well, thank you, I replied, setting aside my papers. Excellent. I'm calling regarding the governor's charity ball this Saturday. He's planning to recognize major donors during his speech, and you're first on the list. Your $1 million contribution completely revitalized our literacy program. The governor wants you seated at the head table with him, alongside the other key donors and officials. I hesitated, the weight of what that would mean pressing against my chest. Michael, there might be a complication, I began carefully. Complication? He repeated, his tone suddenly cautious. My parents are co-chairing the event, I explained, each word deliberate. They don't know about my foundation work. There was silence on the line, an extended pause that seemed to stretch endlessly. Finally, he asked, they don't know you donated $1 million to the state's education initiative? I swallowed. They don't even know I run a foundation. They think I do volunteer filing at some small non-profit office. Another pause. I could almost hear him blinking on the other end. Miss Hartwell, he said slowly, you're the governor's largest individual donor. Your foundation has funded programs that have improved literacy rates in over 60 schools. You've personally overseen initiatives that have changed thousands of children's lives. How do your parents not know this? They've never asked, I said softly, staring out the window at the quiet street below. They assume what I do is insignificant. Something to pass the time. There was a faint exhale of disbelief. Then Michael's voice came back, measured but sympathetic. Well, the governor specifically requested to thank you publicly during his address. It's going to be a big moment. Cameras, press, live coverage. He wants to share your story as an example of citizen-led impact. A humorless smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. This is going to be awkward, isn't it? He chuckled, though it sounded a bit nervous. Probably. But it'll also be memorable. What do you want to do? He asked after a moment. I leaned back in my chair, the phone pressed lightly to my ear. My mind drifted to the memory of my mother's voice, calm, cold, unyielding. We can't have you at the charity ball, Lauren. You don't belong in that circle. I thought about all the years I'd let their words define my worth, all the times I'd stayed quiet instead of defending myself. I remembered the nights I'd fallen asleep over spreadsheets, the early mornings I'd spent visiting schools, the tears shed in frustration and exhaustion as I fought for funding others took for granted. They hadn't been there for any of it. They hadn't seen the real work, the heart behind it. And now, without even knowing it, they had built their grand event around my efforts. Around the very foundation they dismissed. Michael, I said finally, my voice steady. Tell the governor I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it. He seemed relieved. I'm glad to hear that, Ms. Hartwell. I'll make sure you're seated beside him. He's eager to meet you in person. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a long while, staring at my reflection in the dark computer screen. The truth had a strange way of revealing itself, no matter how long it had been buried. My parents had spent years crafting a world built on appearances, but on Saturday night, that world was going to crack open in front of everyone. I reached for the invitation again, tracing the embossed letters with my fingertips. This time, I didn't see rejection in its elegant gold script. I saw recognition. I saw the opportunity to walk into a room that had always been kept just out of reach, and not as the overlooked daughter they remembered, but as the woman they never really knew. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Let's give them something to be proud of, I whispered to myself, already picturing the look on my mother's face when the governor called my name. About 5 years. That's how long it had been, half a decade of enduring polite dismissals, sidelong glances, and the casual disregard of my family pretending not to hear when I spoke about my work. They never asked what I actually did, never showed the slightest curiosity about how my days were spent or why my foundation's name occasionally appeared in local education reports. I had stopped trying to explain it. Some truths, I'd learned, didn't need to be defended. I'll be there, I told Michael, the decision firm and certain now. The governor should recognize whoever he wants to recognize. My parents' misconceptions aren't his problem. When I ended the call, a quiet sense of resolve settled over me. The anxiety that had lingered for years, the constant need to prove myself to people who refused to see me, slowly dissolved. I wasn't going to attend that ball for them. I was going for every teacher, every student, every child who'd written to the foundation saying thank you for believing in us. By Saturday evening, the city was wrapped in the kind of crisp autumn air that made the night feel important. I stood before my mirror, fastening a pair of sapphire earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, my true supporter, the one who had trusted me with her legacy. The gown I chose was a deep midnight blue, tailored perfectly to my frame. Elegant but simple, it carried the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to shout to be seen. I tied my hair back in a soft twist and applied a touch of lipstick, the color just enough to bring warmth to my face. As I looked at my reflection, I realized how far I had come from the person my mother still pictured, the timid girl too quiet at parties, too unsure of herself in polished company. That version of me was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built something real, something that mattered. At 7 o'clock sharp, I arrived at the Grand Hotel ballroom. The building glittered under the floodlights, its grand archway draped in white roses and gold ribbon. The red carpet stretched across the entrance like a river of light, lined with photographers, reporters, and guests in shimmering gowns and tailored tuxedos. The air buzzed with conversation and laughter, the distinct hum of power and influence converging in one room. I stepped from the car, my heels clicking softly against the stone walkway as I began the slow walk up the carpet. The crowd shifted, curious eyes turning toward me, some faces vaguely familiar from charity galas and press conferences. I kept my chin lifted, my posture composed, every step measured and calm. At the entrance, just beneath the ornate gold-framed doors, stood my parents. They were exactly as I expected, Mom in a cream silk gown, every hair perfectly in place, Dad in a classic tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne as they greeted the line of arrivals. The event committee flanked them, all bright smiles and practiced laughter. Then she saw me. Mom's welcoming smile froze mid-motion, her perfectly glossed lips parting just slightly as her eyes widened. For a fraction of a second, she didn't move. Then her hand tightened on her champagne flute. "Lauren," she said sharply, her voice low but edged with disbelief. "What are you doing here? I told you we decided you shouldn't attend." I stopped in front of her, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Good evening, Mom," I said evenly. "I'm here at the governor's request." "The governor's request," she repeated, the words catching on her tongue as though she hadn't heard them correctly. Dad turned toward us, his expression a mix of confusion and irritation. "Lauren," he said, glancing between us, "this is a sophisticated event." "It's not really. The place for me." I finished for him, my voice steady, almost serene. "I assure you, I was invited personally." The committee members shifted awkwardly beside them, pretending not to notice the tension. A few reporters nearby tilted their cameras slightly, curious about the scene unfolding on the steps. "I'm aware of what kind of event this is," I continued, my tone calm but firm. "And I know exactly why I'm here." Mom blinked rapidly, her composure cracking just slightly. "Lauren, you should have told us you planned to attend," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't think I needed to," I replied. "The governor's office handled my invitation directly." For a moment, there was only silence, the kind that stretches thin and heavy, the kind that can't be filled by small talk or charm. Then an usher approached, smiling warmly. "Ms. Hartwell," he said, holding out a program. "The governor asked me to escort you to your table. He'll be announcing the donor recognition shortly." The air seemed to shift. Mom's face paled, and Dad's brows drew together. "Donor recognition?" he echoed faintly. "Yes," the usher said cheerfully. Ms. Hartwell's contribution to the state's education initiative was extraordinary. The governor wanted her seated up front. I turned to my parents, offering a polite, composed smile. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I believe they're waiting for me." And with that, I followed the usher inside, the soft rustle of my gown trailing behind me like a quiet declaration. The ballroom glowed with light, crystal chandeliers cascading over white linen tables, the sound of an orchestra weaving through the hum of conversation. Everywhere I looked, people smiled, greeted, extended hands. No one saw me as an afterthought here. They saw me as what I had become, a leader, a benefactor, a woman who had changed something meaningful. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small under my family's shadow. I felt seen. "The governor doesn't know you, Miss Hartwell," my mother snapped, her tone clipped and sharp enough to draw glances from nearby guests. Her hand fluttered toward the event program as if she could rearrange reality with sheer insistence. Before I could answer, a familiar voice broke through the murmur of the crowd. On the contrary, came the smooth, confident tone of Michael Torres as he stepped forward, his suit immaculate and posture effortless. He extended his hand toward me, smiling in a way that instantly drew attention. "Ms. Hartwell, the governor is looking forward to meeting you. He's been eager to thank you personally for your contribution. Please come with me." Before I could take a step, my mother's manicured hand shot out and gripped my arm. "There's been some mistake," she insisted, her voice rising just slightly. "My daughter isn't on the guest list. This is a restricted area, Mr. Torres. She shouldn't." Michael's expression didn't waver, though I caught the faintest flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said politely, "Miss Hartwell is seated at the head table this evening. VIP seating, as befits our largest donor." The words hit like a thunderclap. My mother's mouth opened slightly, as though to protest, but no sound emerged. My father's face had gone pale, his confusion painted clearly across every line. For a brief, suspended moment, neither of them moved. Michael's tone remained professional, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath it, a deliberate firmness that left no room for debate. "This way, please," he said, gesturing toward the grand double doors. I gave my mother a small, polite smile before slipping free from her grip. "Excuse me," I murmured, and followed Michael into the ballroom, feeling their stunned eyes burning into my back as I walked. The Grand Hotel ballroom unfolded before me in dazzling splendor. Massive crystal chandeliers dripped light across the room, scattering soft reflections over the sea of white roses and gold-trimmed place settings. The air smelled faintly of champagne and polished silver, the kind of scent that only existed in rooms built for display. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided silently between tables, refilling glasses and adjusting centerpieces with practiced precision. At the head table, each seat bore a white card with embossed lettering. The governor's name stood at the center, flanked by the state's most prominent figures: officials, philanthropists, business leaders. And there, beside them, gleaming in elegant black script, was my name, Lauren Hartwell, founder and director, Hartwell Foundation. For a moment, I simply looked at it, letting the sight settle into me. The same name my parents had treated like an afterthought now carried weight enough to command the front of the room. The governor appeared almost immediately, striding toward me with the warm, commanding presence of a man used to being the center of attention. He was tall, silver-haired, and carried himself with the ease of someone who truly loved what he did. "Lauren," he said, smiling broadly as he extended his hand. "Finally, we meet in person. I've been wanting to thank you since your $1 million grant arrived. That funding changed everything for our literacy program." I shook his hand, returning his smile. "Governor, the honor is mine. I'm proud to support the initiative. Education has always been the heart of our foundation's mission." He nodded appreciatively. "And what a mission it is," he said. "Your foundation has been transformative not only for the literacy program but for the Rural Schools Grant, the Teacher Development Program, and that remarkable scholarship fund. You've done more for this state's children than most organizations twice your size." I could feel the room's attention shifting subtly toward us. Guests at nearby tables turned their heads, curious. Some smiled with recognition. Others whispered softly to each other, no doubt connecting the dots between the name and the headlines they'd read in recent years. As the governor continued to speak, several other guests approached: state senators, education commissioners, non-profit directors, and familiar faces from partnerships I'd helped fund. Their greetings were warm, genuine, full of respect. "Lauren," one superintendent said, clasping my hand with both of hers, "your scholarship program saved our district. Without that funding, we would have had to cut our advanced reading courses entirely." Another guest, the director of a small rural initiative, smiled with emotion in her eyes. "You have no idea how many children you've given a future to. Our entire community is grateful." The voices blended together, a chorus of acknowledgement that seemed to fill every corner of the ballroom. And through it all, I could feel my parents' presence from across the room, their stunned silence, the realization settling like stone in their throats. 4 years, they'd believed I was invisible, an afterthought on the edges of their shining world. But tonight, in the space they had so carefully reserved for prestige and influence, I stood at the center of it not as their daughter, but as someone who had carved her own place here. The governor placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've made an extraordinary impact, Lauren," he said sincerely. "When I talk about what community leadership means, I'll be talking about you." Applause began to rise from the nearby tables, soft at first, then stronger, spreading outward in waves. I glanced toward the entrance and caught sight of my mother standing frozen near the doorway, my father beside her, both wearing expressions they couldn't disguise, pride tangled with disbelief, admiration shadowed by guilt. For the first time in my life, they were seeing me clearly. Not as the quiet, unsure daughter who didn't know what to say at parties, but as the woman who had done more for their cherished cause than either of them ever had. I smiled and inclined my head to the governor. "Thank you," I said softly. "But truly, it's the teachers and students who deserve the applause. They're the ones who do the real work." He smiled back, clearly impressed. Spoken like a true leader. As I took my seat at the head table, the orchestra began to play, and the chandeliers shimmered brighter, casting light over every astonished face in the room. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking into someone else's world. I had built my own, and tonight, it shone even brighter than theirs. The superintendent of schools leaned forward with visible warmth in her eyes. "We couldn't have kept our arts classes without your funding," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "The teacher training grant was brilliant, Lauren. Our staff morale has completely transformed." Her words carried across the table, and I felt the sincerity in them, the kind that didn't need ceremony or applause. Moments later, a university president, a man whose institution had partnered with us on several education studies, joined in. "We've already seen measurable improvement in classroom outcomes," he said, smiling broadly. "Your foundation's support allowed us to expand our literacy assessment program statewide. It's rare to see private philanthropy so targeted and effective." Around us, other voices chimed in, directors of local nonprofits, community leaders, district superintendents, each one recounting stories that painted a mosaic of impact. I nodded, offering polite smiles, but my gaze kept drifting toward the far side of the ballroom. There they were. Across the room, I caught sight of my mother and Melissa, both frozen in place, their expressions tight and unreadable under the crystal light. My mother's lips were pressed into a line so sharp it could cut glass, while Melissa's face held that familiar mixture of disbelief and annoyance she reserved for moments when the spotlight wasn't on her. Dad stood a few steps away, speaking hurriedly with someone on the event committee, his expression strained and confused. Every few seconds, he glanced toward me, as if trying to make sense of how I'd materialized in a world he thought belonged only to him and Mom. The orchestra played softly in the background, and the chatter dimmed as the evening's program prepared to begin. At exactly 7:30, the lights in the ballroom shifted, softening over the tables, brightening near the stage. A gentle hush settled across the crowd. Silverware was set down, champagne glasses were lowered, and all eyes turned toward the podium at the front. The governor rose, smiling as he approached the microphone. His presence commanded the room instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth and resonant, "tonight, we gather to celebrate something truly remarkable: extraordinary generosity, visionary leadership, and a shared belief in the power of education." Polite applause rippled through the room. "This year's education initiative," he continued, "has been our most successful fundraising campaign ever. Together, we've raised over $3 million for children's literacy, school improvement, and teacher training programs across our state." The crowd responded with a wave of applause and approving murmurs. My mother clapped stiffly, her eyes still darting toward me like she couldn't decide whether to smile or scowl. "But," the governor said, lifting a hand for quiet, "I want to take a moment to recognize one person whose contribution made all the difference. One donor who single-handedly provided a third of our total funding, someone who believed in this mission so deeply that she committed not only her personal resources but also her foundation's support to transforming education across our communities." The murmuring in the crowd quieted instantly. The governor turned slightly, his gaze landing directly on me. "Lauren Hartwell," he announced, his smile widening, founder and director of the Hartwell Foundation, donated $1 million to this year's education initiative. "Lauren, would you please stand?" My pulse quickened, a rhythmic pounding in my ears as I rose slowly to my feet. The applause began immediately, at first a smattering of claps, then growing, rising into a full standing ovation. Cameras flashed, and the chandelier light fractured into bright, glittering bursts. Faces all around me turned, smiling, nodding, acknowledging. The governor continued, gesturing toward me as the room kept applauding. "The Hartwell Foundation has quietly supported children's education for 5 years," he said, his tone full of admiration. "From rural school revitalization to teacher development, literacy advancement, and scholarship funding, each initiative has carried Lauren's vision of equal opportunity and learning for every child. My heart swelled, not from pride, but from something deeper, a sense of validation that had nothing to do with wealth or attention. It was knowing that all those late nights, all the rejections, all the sacrifices had built something that truly mattered. The governor went on. Under her leadership, the Hartwell Foundation has distributed more than $20 million in educational grants, impacting tens of thousands of children across this state. Lauren represents the very best of philanthropic leadership, quiet, determined, and profoundly compassionate. Applause thundered through the ballroom again, echoing off the high ceilings and golden walls. I could see reporters near the back scribbling notes, photographers snapping photos as flashes danced like fireflies across the tables. My mother was standing now, though her hands came together slowly, almost mechanically. Her face was pale, unreadable, caught somewhere between astonishment and the sudden realization that the daughter she'd dismissed for years had just become the star of her own event. Melissa leaned toward her, whispering something that made Mom's jaw tighten even further. Dad remained seated, staring at me as though seeing me for the very first time. I smiled gently and inclined my head toward the governor, then toward the crowd. The noise seemed to blur into a soft hum around me as I sat down again. My heart was still racing, but not from fear. It was the kind of rush that comes from being seen, truly, undeniably seen, for the person you've always been. I glanced one last time across the room, meeting my mother's gaze. For a fleeting second, something passed between us, something fragile and uncertain. Maybe shock. Maybe recognition. Or maybe the first hint of regret. Either way, the moment belonged to me now. The applause thundered through the ballroom, echoing off the chandeliered ceiling like a wave of sound that refused to die down. The governor smiled warmly and motioned for me to step forward, extending his hand as the applause continued to swell. "Lauren," he said, his voice ringing with sincerity, "on behalf of this great state, and the countless children whose futures you've helped shape, thank you. Your vision, dedication, and generosity have created opportunities that simply wouldn't exist without you." He reached to the side of the podium, lifting a gleaming crystal award from its velvet-lined case. The facets of the glass caught the stage lights, scattering rainbows across the walls as he turned back toward me. "It is my honor to present you with the Governor's Medal for Philanthropic Excellence," he declared. "For extraordinary leadership, selfless service, and transformative impact in the field of education." The applause erupted again as I accepted the award, the smooth coolness of the crystal heavy in my hands. My heart pounded beneath the silk of my gown. The governor stood beside me as photographers called out, "Over here, Miss Hartwell. This way." The bright flashes were relentless, momentarily blinding, turning everything into fragments of light and sound, the shutter clicks, the rustle of applause, the soft murmur of admiration rippling through the room. From the raised podium, I could see everything clearly, the glitter of cutlery, the shimmer of gowns and tuxedos, and, unmistakably, my parents at table 12. Mom's face was a frozen mask of disbelief. Her usual social smile had vanished, replaced by a chalk-white expression that made her look years older. Dad's jaw was slack, his hands still on the tablecloth, motionless. Melissa, always quick to react, was hunched over her phone, her thumbs moving rapidly as if documenting or perhaps damage-controlling the moment. When the applause finally softened, I returned to my seat at the head table. The officials and guests nearby leaned toward me, shaking my hand, offering warm congratulations. "Truly well deserved," said one of the state senators, his tone genuine. "We need more people like you leading with purpose, not just words." Another official chimed in, already talking about future collaborations. "We'd love to explore expanding your teacher training model to other districts," she said. "The results have been remarkable." The superintendent smiled knowingly as he leaned closer. "Lauren, forgive me for asking, but are those your parents at table 12? I nodded, a little tightly. "Yes," I said quietly, "the event co-chairs." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Do they know about your foundation work?" he asked gently. I took a sip of water before answering. "As of about 5 minutes ago," I said, meeting his eyes. He paused, then exhaled softly. "That must be complicated," he said with quiet sympathy. I gave a small, wry smile. "Very." Dessert was being served, miniature tarts, delicate chocolate mousse, slices of layered cake when I noticed movement from the corner of my eye. My mother was making her way toward the head table. Her face was flushed now, her composure stretched thin. Each step she took seemed deliberate, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, cutting through the soft background music. She stopped just beside me, her voice low but strained. "Lauren," she said tightly, "can we speak privately?" Before I could respond, the governor, who was seated only a few places away, looked up with polite concern. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Hartwell?" he asked. Mom turned to him quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, Governor," she said smoothly, though her tone wavered slightly. "I just need a brief moment with my daughter." "Of course," the governor replied with a gracious nod. "But before you go, I do hope you're planning to tell her how proud you are. Her foundation's work has been nothing short of remarkable." For a fraction of a second, the muscles in her face tightened. Then she smiled tight, brittle, rehearsed. "Yes," she said softly. "So proud. So very proud." I stood, excusing myself as politely as I could, and followed her toward a quieter corridor just outside the ballroom. The music and laughter faded behind us as the heavy doors closed, muffling the world we had left inside. The moment we were alone, her mask shattered. "Why didn't you tell us?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and shock. "You run a foundation? You donated $1 million? You've been doing this for 5 years and never said a word to us." I met her gaze steadily. "You never asked," I said simply. She blinked, as if I'd struck her. "What do you mean, we never asked?" "Of course we asked how your work was going." "No, Mom," I said, my tone calm but unyielding. "You asked in the way people ask out of politeness. You didn't really want to know. You assumed what I did was small, unimportant. You decided for me what my life was worth. You told people I worked part-time at some little non-profit doing volunteer filing. You never cared enough to dig deeper." Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to find words. "We thought you were struggling, Lauren," she said, her voice rising. "You let us think that." "I didn't let you think anything," I replied evenly. "You heard what you wanted to hear. I told you I worked in non-profit management, you just never asked what kind. You never asked what projects I led, what I built, or what I achieved. You didn't want to imagine that I could do something on my own, without your approval, without your name attached to it." She stared at me, speechless for a moment, her breath quick and uneven. "You embarrassed us tonight," she said finally, though the words came out weak, more defensive than angry. "No, Mom," I said quietly, "I didn't embarrass you. You just finally saw me for who I am, and that made you uncomfortable." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with years of unspoken tension, years of being dismissed, overlooked, diminished. She opened her mouth again, but no words came. Her carefully constructed image of control had cracked, and for the first time, she looked human. Vulnerable. From inside the ballroom, applause rose again, faint through the doors, another speech, another recognition. I glanced back toward the sound, then looked at her. "I should get back," I said softly. The governor wanted to speak about expanding the foundation's programs. Her eyes darted up to meet mine. "Lauren," she started, but her voice faltered. I didn't wait for her to finish. I walked back toward the ballroom, my step steady, the crystal award catching the light as I passed under the chandeliers. For once, I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. For the first time in my life, I didn't need her permission to be proud. Dad's hand tightened around my arm, not painfully, but firmly enough to stop me mid-step. His eyes searched mine, flickering between confusion, disbelief, and something that looked almost like shame. "Wait," he said, his voice low, the practiced confidence of a man used to commanding rooms now trembling slightly. "Before you go, just tell me how all this happened. You've built something incredible, Lauren. How did we miss it?" I met his gaze steadily. "You missed it because you were never looking," I said, my tone calm but resolute. "You both decided years ago that I was the quiet one, the one who didn't fit, who couldn't keep up with your world of cocktail parties and photo ops. You wanted Melissa to shine, and I was expected to stay politely in the background." Mom took a step closer, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she clasped her hands tightly together. Her voice was tight, almost breaking. But $1 million donation, Lauren. Where did you even get that kind of money? You've never said anything, never hinted. I cut her off gently. Grandma Ruth's inheritance. She left me $2 million when she died. The words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Mom's face drained of color. She left you $2 million? She whispered. She only left me $50,000. Because she knew I'd use it to help people, I said quietly. And she knew you'd use it for appearances. Grandma always saw through the performances, Mom. She knew who I was even when you didn't. For a moment, the only sound was the faint murmur of the orchestra filtering through the closed doors behind us. Dad rubbed a hand across his forehead, looking utterly disoriented. The governor just told me, he said slowly, that you're the state's largest individual education donor. That you've distributed $20 million in grants. 20 million, Lauren. How is that even possible? I took a breath. I invested Grandma's inheritance wisely. The foundation's endowment grew. Every year, we funded more schools, more programs, more scholarships. What started with 2 million became something far greater because I cared about results, not recognition. He shook his head slightly, struggling to process it all. And you never thought to tell us? To include us? We could have. I cut in again, my voice steady. Include you? Dad, you told me I wasn't sophisticated enough for tonight's ball. You said I'd feel out of place around successful people. Why would I share my work with parents who've spent years reminding me how inadequate you think I am? He opened his mouth, but before he could respond, Melissa appeared, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment and anger. Her gown shimmered under the hallway light, but her expression was anything but polished. Do you know what's happening in there? She hissed. Everyone's talking about you, about how you're this major philanthropist, how you've apparently changed the entire education landscape, and how your own family had no idea. I look like an idiot. My own sister, and I didn't even know. I met her glare with calm indifference. I'm sorry my success is inconvenient for you, I said evenly. Melissa crossed her arms, her voice rising. You could have told us, Lauren. We could have supported you, helped you. Helped me. I echoed softly. Melissa, you've spent half your life mocking me for not being ambitious enough, for not chasing the right kind of success. You and Mom made sure I knew I didn't fit into your version of accomplishment. You didn't want to help me, you wanted me small enough not to outshine you. Dad looked between us, his expression strained. The governor asked me, he said quietly, why we weren't celebrating your work as a family. I had to admit we didn't know about it. Do you know how that made us look? Like parents who don't pay attention to their daughter's life. I tilted my head slightly. Which, I said, is accurate. Mom flinched, her voice trembling as she spoke. Everyone is whispering, she said, her composure cracking again. The event committee, the donors, even the press table, they're saying we must not be close, that we're not involved in your life. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for us? You've embarrassed us tonight, Lauren. I looked at her, unblinking. I've embarrassed you? I said slowly. You uninvited me from this event because you thought I wasn't good enough to stand beside you. You didn't want me near your precious donors or your sophisticated guests. But here's the truth. Mom, the governor's largest donor, wasn't welcome at her own parents' charity ball. That's not my shame. That's yours. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. For once, she had nothing left to say. At that moment, Michael Torres appeared at the end of the corridor, holding a tablet and a polite but urgent expression. Miss Hartwell, I'm so sorry to interrupt, he said smoothly. But there are several donors who'd like to meet you. They're interested in potential collaborations with your foundation, some from out of state. The governor suggested we introduce them right away. I nodded. Of course. I'll be right there. As I turned to go, Dad's hand closed around my arm again, gentler this time, almost pleading. Lauren, he said softly, wait. Can we talk later? Privately? This isn't how I wanted tonight to go. I looked at him, my voice calm but firm. Neither did I. But maybe it's how it needed to. He released my arm slowly, his fingers falling away as I took a step back toward the ballroom doors. "You've built something extraordinary," he said quietly. We didn't know. "You could have," I said, pausing at the doorway. "All you ever had to do was care enough to ask." Then I turned and walked back into the ballroom. The lights felt brighter now, the music richer, the air alive with conversation. Michael guided me toward a group of new faces, executives, educators, investors, all eager to speak with me. As I shook hands and exchanged ideas, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't standing in anyone's shadow. I wasn't the overlooked daughter, the underestimated sister, or the family's quiet disappointment. I was Lauren Hartwell, founder and director of the Hartwell Foundation, and tonight, the world finally saw me as I had always been. Mom tried once more 2 weeks later. Her voice, when she called, was softer than I'd ever heard it before, measured, trembling slightly, the tone of someone trying to keep control over a life that had spun too far out of her grasp. "Lauren," she began carefully, "can we please talk? Not about the papers, not about the foundation. Just us." I hesitated before answering. "Go ahead," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I've been thinking," she continued, "about everything that's happened. About how things looked, how things were handled. I know we've made mistakes, but we never meant to hurt you. Your father and I, well, we thought we were guiding you, protecting you from disappointment. We didn't realize we were shutting you out instead." I let her words hang for a moment. "You didn't realize," I echoed quietly. "For 5 years, you didn't realize that dismissing everything I said, ignoring every accomplishment, pretending not to hear when I talked about work, that all of that hurt?" She sighed. "We thought you were doing charity volunteer work," she said weakly. "Something small. We didn't imagine you were managing staff or writing major grants. You were always so private." "I was private because being open with you meant being belittled," I said simply. "Every time I tried to tell you something about my work, you found a way to make it seem insignificant. You told people I was doing clerical tasks. You told your friends I didn't understand real business. You didn't ask questions, Mom. You made judgments." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost picture her sitting in the pristine kitchen of their mansion, clutching her phone with perfectly manicured fingers, surrounded by the silence of a house that suddenly felt too large, too empty, too irrelevant. Finally, she spoke again, her voice smaller. "The calls haven't stopped, Lauren. The committee's dropped me. People I've known for 20 years won't return messages. They're all talking about how disconnected we were, how we didn't support our own daughter. It's humiliating." I closed my eyes, feeling both pity and exhaustion. "Mom, this isn't about humiliation. It's about truth. The story didn't destroy your reputation. The truth did. You built a world based on perception, not connection. You cared more about what people thought of you than what your own family felt." Her voice cracked. "You sound just like your grandmother," she whispered. "Always judging, always thinking you knew better." "Grandma didn't judge," I said softly. "She just saw through people. She believed in me when no one else did. She gave me the means to do something meaningful. And I did." I could hear her shaky breathing through the phone. "I didn't realize she gave you that much money," she murmured. "She never told me why she left you more." "She didn't need to explain it," I replied. "She trusted me to use it wisely. And I did. Every cent of it has gone to children who would have been forgotten otherwise. She'd be proud of what I built, Mom." Another pause. "Lauren," she said finally, "couldn't you issue a statement? Something simple. Say that everything was a misunderstanding, that you just wanted privacy. People would stop talking. It would help your father and me get back into our committees." I almost laughed, though it came out more as a sigh. "You want me to lie again, to fix your image. You still don't understand. I'm not here to protect your reputation. You cared about appearances. I care about impact. That's the difference between us." Her voice sharpened suddenly. "You think you're better than us now, don't you?" "No," I said quietly. "I just finally see us clearly." She didn't respond for several seconds. Then, more faintly, she asked, Do you hate us, Lauren? No, I said honestly. I don't hate you. I just don't need your approval anymore. When I hung up, the weight of years lifted from my chest. For the first time, I wasn't trying to earn her love or their acknowledgement. I didn't need validation from anyone who had refused to see me. Over the following weeks, my schedule filled with meetings. The governor's appointment to the State Education Board opened new doors, policy discussions, advisory panels, collaborative initiatives with universities and private institutions. My name appeared in national education journals, quoted on the importance of accessible learning and equitable funding. The Hartwell Foundation tripled its partnerships, and our next 5-year plan was projected to reach over 100,000 students. Jennifer, my assistant, smiled one morning as she handed me a stack of invitations. You've been requested to speak at 3 conferences, and the university wants to name a lecture hall after the foundation. I smiled faintly. It's not about the name. It's about the work. But privately, I couldn't help thinking of my parents, the ones who had once told me I didn't belong among the successful. Now, they watched from a distance as I stood alongside the very people they'd once claimed I couldn't talk to. A few months later, during an education summit, I saw them again. They attended quietly, seated at a back table, no longer hosts or co-chairs, just guests. When I finished my keynote speech on transforming rural literacy programs, the room gave a standing ovation. As the applause faded, I caught a glimpse of Mom wiping her eyes. After the event, she approached me slowly. You were wonderful, she said softly. I had no idea you could speak like that. I met her eyes and smiled, not coldly, but with quiet strength. You never asked to listen before. She nodded, the weight of realization settling in. I see that now, she whispered. And for the first time, I believed she meant it. A tearful call about being sorry, about not understanding, about wanting another chance came late one evening. I could hear her breathing uneven, heavy, the kind that carries more regret than words ever could. Lauren, she whispered, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand what you were building, what it meant to you. I thought I was protecting our family, not pushing you away. I was wrong. Please, can we start over? I listened, but the silence between us said more than either of us could. I need time, Mom, I said quietly. You spent 5 years dismissing me, 5 years pretending my work didn't exist. You can't erase that with apologies. Her voice trembled. How long will you punish us? I'm not punishing you, I replied. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. I've built something strong, something good. I can't let your guilt pull me backward. There was nothing left to say. We hung up, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar ache in my chest. I just felt peace. 6 months later, the foundation held its annual gala, an event that had grown from a modest dinner into one of the most anticipated philanthropic gatherings in the state. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, crystal chandeliers casting reflections across glass tables adorned with white orchids and blue silk ribbons printed with the foundation's logo. Hundreds of guests arrived, donors, educators, policymakers, and former scholarship students who had gone on to graduate from universities and return as mentors. The air buzzed with energy, the sound of hope turned into conversation and laughter. The governor attended again, this time bringing her entire cabinet. Several state officials came, along with representatives from national education networks and international non-profits seeking partnerships. My name appeared on every program, every banner. I was no longer just the founder. I was the symbol of what belief, perseverance, and purpose could achieve. My parents, however, weren't invited. They saw the photos online, the glowing ballroom, the speeches, the awards, the governor clasping my hands on stage as she spoke about the impact of the Hartwell Foundation. There were headlines the next morning: Lauren Hartwell, from rejection to recognition, philanthropist honored for transforming education across the state. And there, in every photo, I was surrounded by people who truly believed in the mission, smiling, fulfilled, confident. Later that night, I received a message from Mom. You look beautiful. I'm proud of you. I stared at it for a long time, the words glowing on the screen like ghosts from a past I'd already buried. Pride, now after the world had already approved, after others had given me the validation she never could. Pride offered only when her own social world had collapsed, when public opinion demanded she show affection. Eventually, I typed a simple reply. Thank you. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was acknowledgement that she existed, that I'd heard her, but that she no longer held the power to define my worth. Because I had finally learned the truth. My value didn't depend on my parents' recognition. It wasn't born in their approval or their acceptance. It was built through every child who opened a book for the first time, through every teacher who received the resources they needed, through every small community that finally saw opportunity bloom where there had once been none. The governor knew my value. Educators and families across the state saw it every day. The children we supported, the ones who called me Miss Lauren with wide smiles, understood it better than anyone. My parents' blindness wasn't my burden anymore, it was their limitation, their tragedy to carry. They had once told me I wasn't sophisticated enough for their charity ball. But the irony was sharp and satisfying. I had become the sophistication they admired but could never embody, the quiet dignity of purpose, not pretense. I didn't need pearls or champagne galas to prove myself. I was sophisticated enough to fund the very causes they only flaunted for appearances, to change lives instead of impressing dinner guests, to earn a governor's medal not through name or lineage but through action. And I had done it all while they assumed I was filing papers in some basement office, lost in mediocrity. The foundation continued to grow beyond anyone's imagination. Within a year, we launched literacy programs in rural towns that had been forgotten by the state, built digital learning centers in underserved communities, and created scholarships for young women pursuing education leadership. The grant list stretched across counties and cities. Every dollar of Grandma Ruth's inheritance had multiplied into something tangible, something alive. Sometimes I'd look out over the office from my glass window, watching the team I'd assembled, analysts, coordinators, field workers, all driven by the same purpose. I'd smile, thinking of how far I'd come. Meanwhile, my parents learned, slowly and painfully, what it felt like to be excluded, not because they weren't good enough, but because they'd failed to recognize worth when it stood right in front of them. They had traded genuine connection for social status, and now, the same society they worshipped had turned its back on them. Mom occasionally sent more messages, small ones, awkward attempts at normalcy. I saw your interview on TV. Your speech was lovely. We miss you at home. I never ignored her, but I never offered more than a polite acknowledgement. I had boundaries now. Because I understood something I hadn't before. Sometimes, the greatest success isn't the kind you can measure in applause or wealth. It's the quiet power of self-respect, the peace that comes from no longer chasing validation from people who once refused to see your light. The most profound victories, I realized, are often the ones nobody expects, the kind built in silence, born from rejection, and fueled by the strength to rise anyway. And that was my story. Not one of revenge or bitterness, but of reclamation. Of a woman who stopped asking for permission to exist, and instead, built a legacy that would outlast every person who ever doubted her.